Hello everybody. So I have two comments on one of my videos with a bunch of questions, which you see before you now. And obviously the comment section doesn't allow a whole lot of writing, so I decided to answer all of the questions in a video instead. So here we go. I'm going to start with the bottom part first. The comment has four basic issues. Two of them are actually pretty related, but anyway. One, Jesus never claimed he was God, nor ordered anyone to worship him. My response to that is, if God fails to say, I am God, or demand worship, he stops being God? Is that what you're saying? Because that doesn't even make sense. God doesn't have to pronounce himself or demand anything in order to be God. God before creation did not demand worship, so by your requirements of God to be God, God needs creation to be God because God has to demand someone to worship him. That doesn't really make any sense. One, Jesus' mission on earth was not to be worshipped. He came in the role of a servant. Read Philippians chapter 2. He was not interested in worship while doing his mission on earth. So that's not why he was there, so that's why he didn't demand it. Two, if Jesus had explicitly said, I am God, a number of things would have occurred, and I list two of them. A, people would think he was claiming to be the Father, and B, he'd be killed before his appointed time. He'd be stoned to death for blasphemy. So there's good reason for him to have not said, I am God. Very common, Jesus taught monotheism. So does Trinitarianism. Deuteronomy 6:4, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Yeah, Trinitarianism is monotheistic. Surprise! There is only one God, and that's what Trinitarianism teaches. We believe that there's one God in three persons. Another way to put it is God is one being with three centers of consciousness, each sufficient enough for personhood. Number two, Deuteronomy 6:4 says nothing about personhood. It means there's only one God. That's it. That's all it ever meant. There's one God. That's what it means. And this was a prayer called the Shema, which was prayed at least twice daily by the Jews. And it was to remind the Jews that there is only one God. It has nothing to do with personhood again. And it was to keep them from idolatry. So it was just a reminder that there's only one God out there. That's it. It has nothing to do with personhood. It has to do with the amount of gods that exist, and there's only one. And both the Jews and the Trinitarian agree completely on that. By the way, very interestingly though, in 1 Corinthians 8:6, Paul amazingly Christologizes, if that's an actual word, the Shema. So we can read there that there is indeed only one God and only one Lord. However, he demonstrates that that is God the Father and Lord Jesus the Son. So there you have it. And Paul, as I'm pretty sure you know, was a very pious Jew. He was extremely familiar with the Shema, and he knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote 1 Corinthians, which, by the way, also just about every scholar agrees that Paul did in fact write Corinthians. Third point, where does it say our God is a Trinity, or I, Jesus, am your God, so worship me? Questions like this are very interesting because they tell me a lot about the questioner. Because the questions have obvious implications. If Jesus didn't say that he is part of a Trinity, then the Trinity doesn't exist. If Jesus didn't say, I, Jesus, am your God, then he isn't God. If he didn't say, worship me, then he isn't God. So what you're saying is that God has to say these things in order to be God, which means that you are placing a criteria upon God that God must follow in order to be God. You're basically saying, God, you have to do it my way or the highway. You do it my way, or I don't worship you, I don't believe in you, you don't exist. And that's basically what you're saying. So even if Christianity is false and Islam is true, you are still in your heart placing a criteria upon God that God must follow. Fourth thing, and this is very, very commonly brought up, Matthew 19:17, Jesus says, why do you call me good? There are none good but God. And then the question that is asked is, if Jesus didn't think himself as good as God, how can he be good? Or how can he be God? See, the problem is that's not what Jesus is saying. You see, if Jesus is saying that he is not good, then he is saying he is a sinner, which means that he is admitting that he's a stained lamb and therefore goes to the cross knowingly and willingly, knowing that it's a complete waste of time. In fact, if he is saying that he is not good, then the whole gospel is silly. It's ridiculous. So what he is in fact telling the person who calls him good is basically, do you realize what you just called me? And then if you read the whole story, he asks the person to follow him, and the person refuses to do so because he refuses to give up his riches because he idolizes money, even though he realizes that Jesus is probably more than just a mere man. And Jesus here is admitting that fact. So Matthew 19:17 is actually a very good demonstration that Jesus thinks himself to be God, because in the biblical context, there's no way he's saying here that he is not good. So he has to be saying here that he is God. Now we move to the upper part, and I'm actually going to start with the bottom, and then I'll go to the top here. So he says, if Jesus is half man and half God, why does the Bible say God is not man? Or not a man? Well, the first thing is Jesus isn't half man, half God. That's not what Trinitarianism or the incarnation is. Jesus is a person with two full natures, nothing halvesies about anything. A single person with two full natures, a divine nature, and then he added to his person in time and in history a human nature. And so Jesus is again a person with two full natures, no halvesies going on. Number three, the Bible doesn't say God isn't a man. Nowhere does it say that. It says God isn't like a man. God doesn't lie like a man. He doesn't fail like a man, and so on. Whenever you whip out those verses, read them first before you start saying it says God isn't a man. It's not what it's saying. Continue. There's a couple of things that you need to understand so that you can understand the answers I'm going to give to the questions, and we're kind of running out of time, so I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. Jesus has two full natures, which means that he presumably can dwell primarily in either nature, which he had to do in order to do his mission on earth. He had to dwell primarily in his human nature in order to carry out his mission. An example of that would be that he has to be ignorant of the fact that he can't sin. Divine persons can't sin. So either the Satan in the wilderness thing was just for show, and Jesus was aware he can't sin and he can't be tempted, or he actually faced temptation and won over it. One of the two things occurred based on whether or not he was ignorant of the fact that he couldn't sin or not. So he would have to dwell primarily in his human nature, which would say basically his human nature is more conscious and his divine nature is more subconscious. And Jesus also, he took on the human dilemma. God can identify with us, and we identify with him through Jesus. Jesus is the bridge for the gap between God and man. He represents both God and man at the same time. So the fact that Jesus had these two natures is extremely important. The fact that he would primarily dwell in his human nature while on earth, and thus be ignorant of certain things and be weak, have to pee, eat, and all that stuff is extremely important. 2 minutes left, so 2 minutes, 5 questions. Oh boy, here we go. 1. If Jesus is God, why run from Herod? Because he had a fragile human body, and he needed protection, obviously, because he had a fragile human body, and he was a baby. And again, in order for him to be a baby, he had to be ignorant of some facts, so he was consciously human, dwelling primarily in his human nature. That's another example of why he would have to be dwelling primarily in his human nature in order for his mission to work. But anyway, so he had a fragile human body, so God could have protected him, God the Father could have protected him in any number of ways. He could have sent to angels, but instead he had Mary and Joseph take care of it. Number 2, if Jesus is God, why doesn't he not know, or why doesn't he know, oh boy, why doesn't he know the day or hour of judgment? It is not that he doesn't know the hour of judgment, it's that he doesn't know the hour or day of the second coming. And this actually ties into the salvation plan being a marital covenant, so I don't have time to explain it here, but I'll explain it down in the notes section. The other response that one can give to this, however, is that he was ignorant of a fact because he's ignorant of a lot of facts. He, again, dwelt primarily in his human nature. For example, if you can go back in time somehow and ask him to explain how an engine works, a car engine, he wouldn't be able to tell you. But, of course, if you could ask God, he could tell you, couldn't he? So that doesn't mean that Jesus isn't divine. It means that there's certain information that he's not privy to or access to as part of his mission. He begged the Father to save him from being crucified because he was feeling the anxiety and the weight of it, of everything that he was about to do, which is take on the sins of the world. Number 4, why did he need to eat to go to the bathroom? Yes, we Christians say that God manifested in the flesh and urinated and defecated. I know that upsets Muslims, but it is extremely important that Jesus, in his human nature, was exactly like you in every single way other than being a sinner. It was extremely important that he wasn't a sinner, and otherwise extremely important that he was exactly like you in order to save you. So if you don't like it, then don't accept salvation. 5, why was he circumcised? Need a penis? Yes, he needed a penis. He had to have the plumbing in order to do the bathroom thing. Why was he circumcised? Because he was a Jew. He came in the Jewish line.